everybody. God bless you. I am live right now, and I'm noticing I am so shadow banned on YouTube. It's not even funny. I'm not surprised. I'm actually going to put this video up on Rumble as well. So just FYI. So today I have on Jason Fyk, who has been battling Facebook for many years. He has been through the ringer when it comes to the Ninth Circuit Court. And so he is taking his battle a step further using the Fifth Amendment. So I want to read you a little bit about his background. So let me tell you about Jason Fyk. So he built an audience of over 38 million followers on Facebook, only to have them unlawfully deleted by the platform, which many of us have experienced the same thing. In 2018, Jason sued Facebook for anti-competitive misconduct. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, but of course, the Supreme Court denied to hear his case. Jason has since filed a motion to vacate his original judgment because a later decision proved that anti-competitive misconduct is not, in fact, immune from liability. So by the way, he's going to go through all of this right now. He's going to go through Section 230, what it actually is, and the new case that he's bringing forward. So he's still awaiting that decision with the anti-competitive misconduct. He is still awaiting that decision. In an effort to put an end to unlawful social media censorship, Jason founded the Social Media Freedom Foundation nonprofit, which we're going to talk about, socialmediafreedom.org. And he will be soon filing a Section 230 Fifth Amendment constitutional challenge against the United States of America on behalf of all Americans. What does that mean? Jason Fyk is going to be suing the federal government on the grounds of constitutionality of Section 230. So today it's going to be incredible because he's going to go through the clause that the government passed and the unconstitutionality of its section, right? So that the big tech is using. So before we jump into it, I want to say a quick thank you to the sponsor of this live broadcast, Noble Gold. We'll be right back with Jason Fyk. Are you frustrated with this new administration like so many of us are, where we're seeing gas prices going up? Maybe your retirement fund is dwindling, you're losing money, and you're looking for a new approach. Well, Noble Gold is a great place to start. If you're looking for an IRA or a 401k, precious metals is the way to go. And this month, Noble Gold is gifting a 1 ounce solid silver American Eagle coin with every IRA or 401k taken out. Find out more at noblegoldinvestments.com. Again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com. Jason, welcome. I'm hopefully not going to be banned on YouTube or on Twitter right now since I am live streaming. But I know you're very familiar with censorship. What made you get involved in this?
Well, Anna, first off, thank you for having me on. It was years ago. I was doing essentially like CPM, CPA. What that is essentially links out to sites and advertising, marketing, that kind of stuff. And we grew a very large audience. And over time, what a lot of people were unaware of is that Facebook's advertising program in itself, it makes money when people use their advertising. Well, of course, if I'm advertising to someone else, doesn't make them any money. So their advertising program actually started to compete directly with guys like me. We were advertising, they were advertising, and what they, the original plan was that they would squeeze out essentially all of their competition. Because if we couldn't get any organic reach, you have to pay for reach. Well, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And in 2016, they shut down 14 million of my fans, 6 pages roughly, overnight. And of course, just like everybody else, you might get a reason. Sometimes they give you a reason, but when you get hit that hard, they didn't even give me notification. They just shut them off. And it was, it was devastating to my business. I mean, that was the end of that. But the thing is that they essentially rely on the fact that they say it's objectionable content in some way, and then they're protected by Section 230. And it's funny because everyone knows what that is now, that it is some protection that they get because they didn't create the content. And it's not quite that simple, but we're going to go through that today. So fast forward a little bit. I've lost all these pages. And I reached out to an old friend of mine who was a competitor. He ran a fairly large business, and he had done almost 22 million in advertising compared to, I think I'd spent 43,000 in advertising. And sure enough, he had Facebook reps that actually worked for him, like worked directly with his company. So I asked him, I said, could you see if Facebook would reinstate my pages? And he said, sure. So he reached out to Facebook, and the Facebook reps came back to him and they said, we're not going to do it for Jason, but if you own the pages, we'll do it for you. So I sold them the pages. I sold the unpublished pages to my competitor. And sure enough, days after the contracts were signed, like magic, all of the content that I published, all that violated their community standards, all of a sudden didn't violate their community standards anymore. And people ask me, well, what was your content? It doesn't matter. Whether it was good or bad or indifferent, it proved beyond anything. It didn't have anything to do with content. The removal was simply because they didn't want me. Why? Because I don't make as much money for them as my competitor did. We had them I caught them with their hands in the cookie jar. It was blatantly obvious. And we thought that the courts would make that determination the same as we did. But that's not exactly how it worked out, did it?
Right. And it's something that a lot of my friends, even on Facebook, experienced as well, where they have businesses they're running, they have pages they're running, their advertisements they're running, and they're able to sell a lot of their goods. A lot of them are conservative patriots. Well, guess what? They were banned from advertising. I was actually given a notice on my Facebook page, and I don't even do advertising. It's more for ministry. And I was told for no reason, I never even did an ad on my Facebook page. I got a notification. You will never be able to have an advertisement via this page.
Welcome to the club.
Interesting. Well, you had over 38 million followers on your pages, and that is bonkers. The fact that Facebook, that is a private entity, but it allows people to use their platform like a public square, has the ability to shut down your business in the click of a button. And so we're going to go through Section 230, what it actually is, and your lawsuit. And I want to say this really quickly. This is what I love about your lawsuit you're bringing forth, because I've done a lot of research into what you are doing. And I've read the document that you've made, which explains what you're doing and what's unconstitutional about Section 230. And there's some things I want to talk about really quick. One of them being, first of all, we've seen a lot of cases being brought forth, right, by President Trump, Candace Owens. So many of them are bringing forth cases and they keep getting dropped. Number one, they're relying on Congress, right? And you're saying, let's do something else. Let's not rely on Congress. Let's not rely on the Ninth Circuit Court that is extremely corrupt. And this case keeps getting thrown out. Instead, let's take it to the Supreme Court. Now, you've tried to take the Supreme Court, but you were denied. So what are you doing different than you've done before and different to what everyone else is doing? And then we're going to go through this document.
Well, previously, when we filed suit against Facebook, we are suing the the technical term is an interactive computer service provider. Service provider is a simpler way to explain it because everybody calls it a platform. It's not. It is a service provider. And we sue them. And what that means is that we are then asking the U.S. government to render a decision. Did they or did they not commit anti-competitive behavior? And does anti-competitive behavior, is that immunized by Section 230? That was the question we were effectively asking. Page 1, question 1, paragraph 1. I mean, it was right in the beginning, right? And like everyone else, and it was funny because an attorney said this to me. He said everybody's doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. We went in there and we essentially fought the language. Like, what does it say? And unfortunately, the language is just being ignored by the judges. I mean, it's a lot of people don't look at the law, and we're going to look at it today, and I'm going to show you it. It's blatant. Like, when you actually look at it and you go, well, that's not what it says. And when you walk through it, but the problem is that we did all that. I mean, we explained the language, that it's not the case, because let's actually talk about my scenario. They said that I was treating Facebook as a publisher or speaker of content I provided. That's what their term was, and they were getting into this whole back and forth. But the thing is, who's the publisher? I was the publisher, and I wasn't treating them as me. So there was a problem there, and that they just were not looking at it. And that textual interpretation issue keeps coming. I mean, that's what everybody keeps doing over and over and over again, expecting the California courts to do something different.
Right.
And they're not. And we have accepted the fact that, okay, the courts don't want to actually solve their problem. They want this to be absolute sovereignty, to do anything publishing that you want, no matter if it's illegal or not. I mean, they just don't simply care. So we've accepted the fact that, okay, well, if the courts aren't going to do their job, we're turning our sights on the courts. And we're saying, and we're not asking for Congress's help, although I think anybody in Congress that would push against the idea of getting rid of a portion of the Section 230 that is unconstitutional would be political suicide, in our opinion. And it would actually be very smart for some of these congressional members to jump on board and help us, because here's what happens next. This is where we're turning our sights. If we file, so what happened here is I was denied a day in court, right? Now, a lot of people think I lost. I didn't lose.
Yeah, you were
I was
denied due
literally just
process.
stopped. Like,
Right.
no, you can't bring a case. So I was never given a single day in court. Nothing. No oral arguments. They just blew this out. And then the Supreme Court could have handled it. And realistically, I mean, there is the potential miracle that they turn around, they see this, and they go, oh, you know what? We should go do this, because the strange thing was this. There was a case called Enigma versus Malwarebytes, right? And it ended, and it made a determination that proved we were right. We were right from the very start. And I never got a day in court. Well, Justice Clarence Thomas went out there and he did something that's very rare. I mean, so rare that we don't even know if it's ever happened before. And he rendered this 10-page long treatise on the law explaining Section 230, and it could have been identical to our briefings. I mean, it's exactly what we said. And he himself said, and there it is in highlight right there, leaving questionable precedent in their wake. The past precedent is questionable. There's mistakes. There's things that the courts have said that they perpetually use forward. Like for example, if the content had originated with another provider, it is per force immune. Well, that's not true. It's not what the law says. And it's those language issues we're done with. And we're now looking at this from the standpoint of, okay, if I can't get a day in court, I can't seek redress. Well, what does Section 230 do? What does it allow? What kind of law is it? And that's when we started digging into stuff that nobody else is digging into. And we found out that Section 230 is administrative law. And we'll get into that too today. That go ahead.
Go ahead. No, finish your sentence.
I was going to say that administrative law allows us to look at what does it do. And what we realized is it is a delegation of authority. They're giving these companies this protection to go do something. And it's already in the law what they can do, which means that if they're allowed to restrict my life, liberty, or property, I am entitled to a day in court. And I didn't get that.
So on that grounds, you're able to bring this case forward. What I want to talk about before we jump into Section 230 in your case in detail, because it's really incredible, guys. Please share this broadcast, by the way. Now, I know YouTube is suppressing me and censoring me, and obviously they're going to, but please share this because we're going to go through this. Now, I want you to address something. This is something interesting that you told me when I met you at AmpFest this past weekend. And by the way, you did a great job presenting this. This is why I was like, Jason, you need to come on my show and explain this, because I haven't heard anyone explain Section 230 like you have, really going into the nitty-gritty and talking about what we need to actually do, because this case keeps getting thrown out. So you had an interesting thing that you said, and I want you to explain this. You said that this Section 230 does not violate the First Amendment. It violates the Fifth Amendment. Explain why.
Well, okay. So there are attorneys, tech attorneys, or maybe just bots. I don't know really what it is, but Anytime you ever bring up anything about Section 230, they keep coming in and they say, well, they have a First Amendment right. I'm sure you've heard that. They're a private entity. They have a First Amendment right. And I go, yeah, they do. You're right. You're 100. I mean, they're right. But the thing is that they don't actually make the delineation of where the First Amendment right ends and a government agency authority begins. Now, here's the thing, and I'll ask you a very simple question, Anna, and I'm sure your audience knows this too. Did the First Amendment exist prior to 1996 when Section 230 was written?
Definitely.
And it still exists now, does it not?
Yes, it does.
So those of the people out there that are saying Section 230 is a protection for First Amendment is ridiculous. It's already insured. Like, they have a First Amendment right. And everybody says, well, then they can take everything down. And yes, they can. And you know what? We can sue them.
Right.
That's where the government authority comes in and says, oh, no, you can't sue them. So they have a First Amendment right. They can do whatever they want. But I could seek redress. I could do something about it. Here, the government's saying, nope, can't do it. We're stopping you because we're letting them do that under a protection. That's where the First Amendment does apply, but is not applicable in this circumstance because, again, there are cases out there that are First Amendment cases. And the point is they do have a First Amendment. But it's the authority that's granted is the problem, not the First Amendment. So they're separate things. Our case, on the other hand, is looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, well, if they're granted this authority, because there have been cases, they say, if you ever heard the term state actor? Okay,
Yes.
let me explain this in very simple terms. Anna, if I said to you, you can cross the street, but not on the crosswalk, not a problem because I got your back, I got you protected. Did I just give you the authority to cross the street?
Yes. It's like,
okay,
it's like an encroachment where you, or I forgot what it's called.
I'm just saying you can do it.
Yeah, you give
Under
me the
protection.
right to do it.
You're good. I got your back. Not a problem. You're not going to get in trouble. Go ahead. Right? Protection. The other side of it is that if I said, Anna, cross the street, you need to go do it now. That's a directive, right? That's not authority anymore. I mean, there's authority built within it, but it's a directive. It's an action based on what I've told you to do. So that's what a state actor is. It's essentially, it's not the authority to do it. It is the directive to do it. So if the government is in fact telling them, do this, do this, do this, do this. So they're trying to hide behind that minor deviation between action, an actor and authority. Well, there are cases that have argued that no, it's not state actor. It is a government authority, but it is not state action. Well, the interesting thing is that I've had certain congressmen tell me it's not an authority. Well, cases have already said it's a government grant of agency authority, right? They're allowed to do this under protection. So there's the difference is that when you grant someone authority, the question is, can they have that authority? That's the question that was racking my brain over here. And I'm going, can they actually do that? Like, can they grant them protection to block and screen my materials? And let's just look at those words. If you are to block and screen somebody, are you not restricting something they can do?
Yeah,
you are, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So if you're restricting something and you're restricting what? Their materials, that's your property, right? Because it's your property that you put on their property. And if the government is granting them a protection to restrict your liberty and property, it's not a First Amendment issue anymore. It becomes a Fifth Amendment issue because the government has granted these private companies agency power. So that's where we started, that was square one. We realized, okay, we need to take this thing a whole new direction. They call it it's a novel case. Nobody's ever pursued this. So, and I see you have this up. This is what I sort of put together. And this is lay terms using some of the information that's out there. And we can walk through exactly why this thing is unconstitutional and what the obligations are with this type of law.
Yeah, this is a few pages long. And I recommend you guys just listen. And if you're driving, just listen, because this is incredible. And you really explain the law what Section 230 is and what your case is going to present, because you're about to take them back to court. And we will talk about afterwards why the Supreme Court has to take your case on, which is going to be mind-blowing. Okay, so here we go. Let's go through this. This is worth listening to. So first of all, this is Jason's background. We'll talk about. Actually, I should say the background of the Congress. Okay, background. In 1996, Congress sought to protect an interactive computer service provider when voluntarily restricting offensive material, acting as a good Samaritan in an effort to help rid the internet of filth and protect our children from harmful content online. Congress resolved this by delegating regulatory, quote, agency authority, Section 230 civil liability protection, directly to private entities, Title 47 U.S. Code, Section 230, protection for private blocking and screening of offensive material passed into law. Now, Jason, this sounds like a great reason why Congress should have passed Section 230, right? It's the Good Samaritan clause where it's an effort to, again, protect the filth that's online, to protect our children from harmful, violent content online. So under Section 230, it sounds like a totally normal law to pass. Your thoughts?
So they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And
Right.
Unfortunately, that is the case here, is they had good intentions. The idea is that when Congress wrote this, is that they saw the expanse of the internet and they wanted to allow these companies to be able to act upon content, to be able to remove it, to protect children. I mean, that's fundamentally the point. And I mean, that's even the point of the whistleblower right now, is that we want to protect children. However, even in that circumstance, I would say, well, why are you pushing harder to censor people? Instead, why don't you push harder to keep children off the site? Wouldn't that make more logical sense? But in the case of this law, Congress recognized that if it granted this regulatory agency authority and it took any action as a publisher, now remember this, we have to be very careful with our words, because the Supreme Court has already said that we must give every word and every term of the law meaning, right? Everything's important in what's written, right? And we have to avoid redundancies and duplications whenever possible. This is an old, Supreme Court standing situation. So if they can act as a publisher, and they remove content, because that's their function, right? They can restrict materials, but they act as a good Samaritan. And well, that makes sense, right? Well, we're going to act as a good Samaritan. We're going to protect others. We're going to take the content away so that our children are protected. The problem was, and people don't know this, is that they faced a conflict, because as soon as they act as a publisher, they would become responsible for everything on their site. They weren't responsible for anything they didn't do before this. So anybody that says the 26 words, which is actually only 230C1 of Section 230, that created the internet, is fundamentally wrong. And the reason is, first off, besides the fact that the internet existed before Section 230, so that's wrong in itself. But if you were not responsible for what anybody else did before that, they had to articulate that, and realistically, that's not even a protection. That's the crazy part. Everybody thinks that that's a protection. No, it's an instruction. It says, we don't treat you as someone else for what someone else did. It's very simple. And we'll get into the actual language in a bit, and I'll show you how that works. But here, they knew that they were going to have a problem, because they were going to be a publisher. And if they were a publisher, they'd be responsible for other stuff. So they said, hey, you can't be treated as that, even when you restrict the content. And that's how they resolved it. So that's the background of why it was formed and how it was formed. And it was with good intention, but there was problems that would arise that came out of this. And we'll get into that now.
Exactly. Then they extended it to say, well, hate speech is harmful as well. So here we go. So the law, let's break down the law. This is something that I've been wanting to break down for a while. So I'm so thankful, Jason, you're here to break this down for us. Okay, so here's the law. Title 47 U.S. Code 230 is an administrative law which provides civil liability protection when a private entity takes, quote, any action voluntarily in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. End quote. Private entities are acting as regulatory agents of Congress. Interesting. Private entities are acting as regulatory agents of Congress. Quote, agencies are delegated power by Congress to act as agencies responsible for carrying out certain prerogative of the Congress, quote, block, well, not quote, but in parentheses, block or screen offensive materials. Agencies are created through their own organic statutes, Section 230, which establish new laws, and in doing so, creates the respective agencies to interpret, administer, and enforce those new laws. Generally, administrative agencies are created to protect a public interest rather than to vindicate private rights. End quote. Section 230 provides administrative agency authority, not to be confused with state action to private entities. An administrative agency is, quote, a government body authorized to implement legislative directives, block or screen offensive materials by developing more precise and technical rules, which are, we know as community standards, than possible in a legislative setting. Many administrative agencies also have enforcement responsibilities, close quote. Do you want to comment on that before I continue on the next paragraph?
Yeah, let's unpack that. And if you can pull that back down for a second. So most people are unaware that it is administrative law. And these quotes come out of administrative law. And what it basically says is that they have a duty. And what was that duty? That duty is to block and screen offensive materials. That was the prerogative of Congress. That's what they wanted done. Okay. And then they're created, the agencies are created through their own organic statutes. Well, that's what Section 230 does. It created all of these private entities and they became agents of the government, effectively acting on behalf of the government and on their prerogative. Yes, they are allowed to do it at their own will, but the thing is that they themselves set up their own law. And people don't realize that's what community standards are. They are quasi-legislative law. And the thing is that they then can enforce it as the agency. They've been granted the power to make up the rules and enforce their own rules. This right here is the structure of which Section 230 functions. It is administrative law, and it is what every single private entity that has been granted these protections can do. So that's really what this says right here. And keep in mind, everyone, this isn't my words. These are quotes right out of and that was what I did here for everyone, Anna, is I'm using the actual information directly from these laws. This isn't me explaining this. This is the law explaining this. Most of this was actually taken out of Cornell Law School. I mean, these are not Wikipedia stuff either, by the way. And that's why all of the blue administrative law, you can click on them and go right to them, you know? So we can move on from here.
Perfect. Okay, so the next section, quote, the non-delegation doctrine is a principle in administrative law that Congress cannot delegate its legislative powers to other entities. This prohibition typically involves Congress delegating its powers to administrative agencies or to private organizations, interactive computer service providers. Right. In J.W. Hampton versus United States, 278 U.S. 394 in the year 1928, the Supreme Court clarified that when Congress does give an agency the ability to regulate, Congress must give the agencies an, quote, intelligible principle, end quote, on which to base the regulations. Justice John Marshall stated that if Congress delegates quasi-legislative powers to any body, it must provide a general provision by which those who act can, quote, fill up the details, ... This became known as providing an intelligible principle to which the agency is instructed to conform. The intelligible principle could be anything in the public interest, convenience, or necessity, or considered, quote, just and reasonable. In Mistretta versus United States, Justice Scalia warned, the scope of delegation is largely uncontrollable by the courts. We must be particularly rigorous in preserving the Constitution's structural restrictions that deter excessive delegation. For example, Section 230. The major one, it seems to me, is that the power to make law cannot be exercised by anyone other than Congress, except in conjunction with the lawful exercise of executive or judicial power.
So this is important. This right here is the point of this entire thing.
And by the way, Jason, really quickly, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to ask you this. I know you're not a lawyer, so I just want to make that really clear. He's not a lawyer, but he's been studying the law and reading the code for many, many years. There's a lot of lawyers who have actually reached out to him and said, hey, Jason, what is this? Can you explain it? Because Jason has been reading it for so long. And so you don't have to be a lawyer to be able to read code into, the statutes and everything, and to be able to understand that there's something wrong here in this picture, considering all the other Supreme Court cases and what our Supreme Court justices have said. And so you can find the cracks in the code where it's unconstitutional. And so the whole point is to bring down Section 230 that is unconstitutional, like Jason said before, if you're just tuning in, not on the grounds of the First Amendment, but on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment. The First Amendment protects the private entities to have their own free speech. They can do whatever they want, but they could be sued. Well, if the case keeps getting thrown out by the courts and also by the Supreme Court, well, he's not getting the right for due process. But again, for those tuning in, we're breaking down Section 230. So why don't you explain this part, Jason? Because this is an important paragraph.
So this is a portion of what the Fifth Amendment. So when you say I'm suing on the Fifth Amendment, they say, well, okay, under what what doctrine? The non-delegation doctrine is one of the strongest there is, and if you look at what must be Congress has to lay down this principle that is in the public interest. It needs to be convenience and necessity, right? So essentially, in the public interest is the fundamental reason that they would give this authority, right? And they lay down an intelligible principle, and that's actually where this whole thing unlocked. And I'll tell you just sort of a funny story how this all went down. I was reading things and I was stuck on, we even in our original brief said, why is Good Samaritan in quotes? It's right in the law. It says protection for Good Samaritan blocking and screening of offensive materials. Well, it was in quotes and it's capitalized. And we thought it was an emphasis. Well, guess what? It actually has a real purpose. The quotes here are the intelligible principle. Notice how intelligible principles in quotes, the general provision is in quotes, those who act, fill up the details. It's because they're articulating the purpose, an easily understood principle upon which everything functions, all of it. So they've done that in Section 230. They said, here's your purpose. Here's your fill up the details, right? Here's your general purpose. So we know it's now Good Samaritan, and we know that this is the type of law that we're talking about, right? But the problem that with this is that, and Justice Scalia actually warned about it, is that the scope of delegation is largely uncontrollable by the courts, because I'm sure you've all heard, well, they didn't do it in good faith. Guess what? The courts are putting no measure to good faith. They're not doing any of the things that they're doing, and that's why it's uncontrollable. And he went on to say that, he even said, we must be particularly rigorous in preserving the Constitution's structure restrictions that deter excessive delegation. Well, there you go. Here's what I'm saying to the courts is that it is unconstitutional under the non-delegation doctrine, because they've delegated powers that have no limits. None.
Yeah,
They
we
just
didn't.
committed an anti-competitive behavior and were immunized for it. That doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, we've given big tech way too much power. And that's what Justice Scalia exactly here is saying. Be careful of giving them excess power where they are, they're regulatory agents of Congress. Like, how is big tech a regulatory agent, or all of the big tech regulatory agents of Congress? We did not elect them to be regulatory agents of Congress. They were not elected. They have no right to do this. This is unconstitutional. So continue.
You just nailed it, Anna. And honestly, you just simplified the whole thing. Private entities do not have the authority to regulate and restrict the life, liberty, or property of another. That is fundamental to our Constitution, and that's what this law did. It gave that power to private entities because they have the protections, they have the authority to act as agents. And again, not to be confused with a state actor, totally different thing. So yes, let's move on. Next section here.
Perfect. Okay. Next section is the next page. Okay. Section 230 grants administrative agencies, private entities, under the quote intelligible principle of a quote good Samaritan, right? Big tech is a good Samaritan.
And there it is.
The authority to create any rule they deem to be quote in the public interest, solely relying on the agencies, here are private entities, own views and policy agenda rather than requiring Congress to set forth objective guidelines.
So Anna, we talked about this last night, and it is sort of a revelation. Why do you think that big tech is desperately trying to get congressional oversight, congressional guidelines? Because they don't exist. And without them, and without proper, with the proper formation to this law and the proper, rules and regulations and review of scope, it's unconstitutional and they know it. And that's what they're scared of right now, is because 230 is unconstitutional, and they know that right there. Even that, look at intelligible principle and Good Samaritan, right? Good Samaritan is there, and look at, so we know two cases beat Section 230. And the only reason we know it is because I actually looked it up, because it was nowhere in the mainstream media and there was no fanfare about it. But if you look up Lemon versus Snap and you look up Enigma versus Malwarebytes, they beat Section 230. Why did they beat it? This is where it gets interesting. So the Lemon versus Snapchat case was a negligence, contributory negligence, right? Which, well, they weren't the publisher, right? Well, they still got past 230. And the case of Enigma versus Malwarebytes was anti-competitive behavior. And in that case, and I'll give you a direct quote from the case, which fundamentally undermined the decision mine. They said that the Good Samaritan provision of the Communications Decency Act does not immunize blocking and filtering the decisions that are based upon an anti-competitive animus, right? In other words, we were right, like that anti-competitive behavior is not protected. It doesn't matter if they were the publisher. And you know why? Because it fundamentally fails the Good Samaritan test. They can't be a Good Samaritan if they removed your content for their own financial gain. It doesn't work. And guess what? Neither is negligence. Tort claims should not at all have anything to do with Section 230 protections. It doesn't matter. If they're doing it for their own financial gain, or if they're doing it for nefarious purposes, you're not a Good Samaritan, right? And guess what? Those courts stumbled upon that intelligible principle. If you didn't meet the intelligible principle, it fails the 230 test initially. Have the courts done that so far? No. Those are the first cases that are really that recognize you have to be a Good Samaritan first. Right? Bet you nobody out there knows that. Like, just ask yourself that. Not good faith. Were they a good Samaritan? What did they do? Did they do it for the good of others in the interest of the public, convenience, and so forth? Or did they do it for themselves? That
Right.
changes the entire playing field, doesn't it?
Right. Because a lot of them are taking them off because, well, they might be advertising for another big tech company or they're just
Or relying on their own views and policy agenda rather than requiring Congress to set forth objective guidelines. In other words, they're doing whatever they choose because there's no accountability whatsoever.
right, because they are the ones that are the agents of Congress, the regulatory agents, and they're also the police. So pretty incredible.
Yeah, they're the lawmakers and the police. Well, we'll get to that shortly. Let's go on to the courts.
Okay, let's read about the courts. The courts. Justice Thomas.
Preciously.
Thank you. 1 second. Let me just, okay. Justice Thomas preciously noted in Enigma vs. Malwarebytes, quote, courts have extended the immunity in Section 230 far beyond anything that plausibly could have been intended by Congress. Courts have also departed from the most natural reading of the text by giving internet companies immunity for their own content. Courts have long emphasized non-textual arguments when interpreting Section 230, leaving questionable precedent in their wake, close quote. Most, if not all cases seeking to surpass Section 230 immunity rely on untwisting the quote non-textual or the questionable interpretation of the statute. Most, if not all, Section 230 cases wind up in the very same California court system. This is interesting. This is what I can't wait to explain this, because all these court cases have to be seen in California court cases, right? It has to be seen in California. Since nearly all major technology companies reside in Silicon Valley. And as we know, the California courts are a little bit corrupt. Yeah. The California courts have consistently failed to address the most natural reading of the text by giving internet companies immunity for their own content. Although Justice Thomas welcomed an appropriate case stating, quote, in an appropriate case, we should consider whether the text of this increasingly important statute aligns with the current state of immunity enjoyed by internet platforms, close quote. The Supreme Court denied Jason Fyk's case, Fyk versus Facebook, petition for writ of certiorari.
Certiorari.
I don't know what that is.
Big word, certiorari.
Explain that. Okay, so explain this.
So here's the thing. Everybody is trying to fix the language of Section 230 because the courts have misinterpreted it. It's a misunderstanding of multiple words, and we can actually walk through some of those. But there's been lots of cases that have made just mistakes, and they oftentimes these cases do what's called text proofing, which is essentially they want to prove what they're saying, so they grab a piece of text completely out of context and they shove it in there, and it makes it sound like it's completely something else. And the problem is there's so much of it that preceded all of these cases that even and these aren't even my words. This is the one of the 9 people that preside over the highest courts in the land saying there is questionable precedent in the wake of all of these cases, that they've departed from actually just reading what the words say. I mean, that's literally what they're not doing, is they're not reading what it physically says, and they've just come up with this broad spectrum of immunity thinking that that's what Congress intended, and it can't be. It's so broad that there's no limits to it. There's no measurable bounds. It's just impossible. So the other problem is that normally in most law, you end up with what's called a circuit court conflict. What I mean by that is that somebody will do something wrong on the West Coast, and then somebody will do something wrong on the East Coast. And the case on the West Coast might find the wrong way, might be wrong. Okay. And then what happens is the one on the East Coast gets it right, which seems to be actually the more common thing now. But they get it right. And then what happens is, because those two things are a conflict, right? Because, if you say, can you do something? One says yes, the other one says no. Well, now there's a problem. So it gets appealed and it goes up to the Supreme Court. And now what the Supreme Court is sort of bound to do is to deal with a court conflict, meaning this court said one thing, this one said another. The last line of defense here is you guys, you need to tell us what's right, what's wrong. That's great. Most laws do that. The problem is that Silicon Valley is all of your tech companies. So everything that is technology based, and when I say everything, obviously not absolutely everything, but 99% of all tech companies and of course, these are the tech companies that are actually doing wrongful acts, are going to go to the Ninth Circuit. There's no other way to do it. And as a matter of fact, actually, that was one of the things that I think was overlooked um, in Florida when Governor DeSantis wanted to fix this. I mean, it was a obvious, it was a good effort. I think it would be much simpler for states and governors to simply write a very simple rule that if you do business as a technology company and somebody resides in a state, that they can override your terms of service venue, meaning you don't have to sue in California anymore. Guess what? What that would happen is that other courts that are not, necessary, and we don't want to say that the courts are corrupt. I don't want to say that for sure. But what I want to say is they're making erroneous decisions. They're wrong. And they're not looking at it carefully and looking at what people are saying. They're just leaving it in place. Other courts may look at it carefully and say, okay, you're wrong. And then we end up cleaning up the mess. That's why it doesn't get solved, because no other courts are dealing with 230. Matter of fact, actually, and this will tell you something. I spoke with Pastor Doman. Doman has a case against Vimeo, and they have pulled 230 out of the entire proceedings. It was a 230 defense, and then all of a sudden they pulled it out because it's not Ninth Circuit. It would potentially have given us a circuit court conflict, and they've now turned it into completely different things, I believe, in standing and so forth. But essentially now we're not going to get a 230 circuit court conflict. And here we go again. So that's one of the major problems, is that we're just not dealing with enough new judges that look at the language and give us that circuit court conflict. So that's one of the perpetual problems that we're facing.
Yes. And so this is why I like that you break this down and use words that they're supposed to withhold and upstand. Okay, let's talk about the constitutionality. The Fifth Amendment says to the federal government that no one shall be, quote, deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, close quote. The internet being no exception. I have personally been denied due process, what Jason's saying. I have personally been denied due process by the California courts and United States Supreme Court when a government authorized, quote, agent, interactive computer service provider, took action to deprive me of my liberty and property online, right on Facebook here, under protection, section 230 of the law, under 5 U.S. Code 706 scope of review. When an agency takes an agency action, the agency here being a private person, right, this private entity, the reviewing court, quote, the reviewing court shall hold unlawful and set aside agency action, findings, and conclusions found to be A, arbitrary, capricious, an abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law, B, contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity, close quote. Section 230 prevents all scope of review by providing immunity for any and all agency actions, regardless of whether the action is arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or contrary to constitutional right. In other words, Section 230 protects, quote, protects or immunizes, aka denies due process, when an interactive computer service provider, the agency, takes, quote, any action, agent action, to restrict access to or availability of material, liberty, or property that the provider considers, which is arbitrary, potential abuse of discretion, while relying on the provider's own views and policy agenda, right? Not the Congress's laws, but their own agenda, their own political views, their own views, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected, end quote, contrary to constitutional rights. Section 230 is unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment based on the principles of the non-delegation doctrine and void for vagueness doctrine. Quote, under the vagueness doctrine, a statute is also void for vagueness if a legislature's delegation of authority to judges and or administrators is so extensive that it would lead to arbitrary prosecutions restrictions. Furthermore, Section 230 is an immunity from suit, from the lawsuits. According to the restrictive theory, quote, the immunity of the sovereign is recognized with regard to sovereign or public acts of state, but not with respect to private acts. In other words, states, here private entities, should enjoy immunity from suits arising out of the exercise of their governmental functions, but not from suits arising out of the types of activities in which private parties engage. In contradiction to the restrictive theory, Section 230 allows both private and governmental function immunity simultaneously. In Barnes versus Yahoo, the Ninth Circuit Court determined, quote, any activity that can be boiled down to deciding whether to exclude material that third parties seek to post online is perforce immune under Section 230. If the Ninth Circuit is correct, that would also include unlawful behavior such as antitrust action. Such was the conclusion in Fyk versus Facebook. All agency actions cannot logically or legally be immune from suit, and an administrative law such as Section 230 be constitutional under the Fifth Amendment's due process clause. Now, Jason, I want you to go through this. There's a lot here.
A lot to unpack.
And a lot to unpack, but I want to say this. Pray that my big tech platforms don't get banned, because I'm live on Twitter and YouTube right now. And you know what? People need to know this. So it is what it is. But please explain this. There's a lot here.
So obviously, a lot of people know what due process is, but it specifically says that you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, meaning you get your day in court if you are restricted by anything that the government is attached to. Well, here, the government's granting the authority, so you should be entitled to due process, right? The internet being, no exception to any of that, right? So the thing is that when the agency takes an action, normally, right? So this is talking about the FCC, the SEC, or any other agency that, like even the IRS or UPS or the U.S. Postal Service, right? Their action, whatever they do to regulate you in any way, shape, or form, is subject to due process. You can challenge it, right? And here, what I've done is I've gone into 5 U.S. Code Section 706 scope of review to show that when an agency takes an action, this is what normally happens, right? The agency here is actually, in fact, and I use private person. The reason being is if you look up the definition of a person, that includes companies, corporations, anything that is non-governmental. Okay, that's really what the delineation is. It says the reviewing court shall hold unlawful and set aside the agency action, meaning the courts will say, okay, what you did was wrong, and findings and conclusion found to be, and here's the standards. If it's arbitrary, if it's capricious, an abuse of discretion or otherwise, and not in accordance with law. Now, a lot of people have never, everybody that's looking up Section 230 right now is reading Section 230 cases. I'm reading cases like Fox versus the FCC, where the FCC decided that they were going to restrict and fine the Fox network because some bad words were said, which is basically what Facebook does and Google does to us. Like these companies are doing the same function, and they went and they fought it, and they said, you can't just say that it's a bad word because that's arbitrary. What is a bad word? What is hate speech? So effectively, these rules that they're making up, which are deliberately arbitrary, right? They can't exist like that because the agency action is complete. It doesn't have any scope of review, none. It just isn't there, and that's one of the major problems. B, contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity. Well, I mean, that in itself, if you look at the actual words of the law, it says even if the materials are constitutionally protected, it defies the Constitution in the words of the actual law, and we'll get to that as well. So it basically, immunity means that you just can't get a day in court. You don't have any way to see. It's not a trial. You don't get anything. You just get said, nope, you're not getting into court. Even though these agency actions have no standard of review, there's no oversight. There's no, I mean, they're literally as arbitrary and capricious as you could possibly get. I mean, that's what everybody says online. Well, that's not bad. Well, in their terms, they get to say it's bad. In ours, we go, that's not bad. And that's not even the legislative intent, because it's not about children. Divisive political content. I mean, it was so obvious with this whistleblower that she's calling for more regulations because somehow we're harming, that girls are committing suicide on Instagram because of divisive political content. I don't know of any girl that has ever killed herself because of political content. I mean, I suppose it's theoretically possible, but not really a major problem for children. Make sense, right? So let's go on to the second section.
And of course, this whistleblower is all over CNN. You know how that is. But
they support the narrative that they want. This will get virtually no. I mean, this is going to be on your audience to get this out here, because this, I can tell your audience, I've been doing this for a lot of years. This is the most comprehensive look at Section 230 that has ever been done. Anna, unlike a lot of people, sat down, read what I said. We spent 2 hours on the phone last night walking you through it so that you understood it, and it clicks. All of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this is right. And that's the thing, is your audience needs to look at this and pay attention, and it will click. And when it does, you recognize most of what these people are saying out there is just wrong. And I don't know if it's deliberate or not.
Well, here's the thing, is that you can say how the Section 230 is unconstitutional, but you need to have a good case to stand on, or else it'll keep getting thrown out. Right. People are leaning on Congress to pass laws and this and that. No, we don't need this congressional Section 230 clause is unconstitutional, period. We don't need them to make a new law. We need them to repeal this law because it's unconstitutional. And that's up to the Supreme Court to say that to Congress. So I'm just glad that you're in this fight and you're breaking this down, because let me tell you, I've talked to a lot of people about Section 230. And when you explained it to me last night, I thought this is very interesting. I haven't heard this side before. That's why we are here right now. But let's continue, because there's a little bit more. But I'm telling you, this is an extensive breakdown. And let me ask you a question. If somebody wants to get their hands on this document that you've created, can they email you?
Absolutely. They can email me, or they can get in touch with you, because they're, if everybody, honestly, and we are actually going to refine that. I did that as a request out of the American Priorities Festival, and that's what I put together literally out of my head in 3.5 hours. See, this wasn't even the real breakdown, which is, as I told you earlier, about 11,000 words. We've gotten into all of it.
And by the way, really quick shout out to American Priority Conference. They have such great conferences. Every year I meet whistleblowers. Every year I meet amazing patriots who are doing the best stuff in the country. Last year, I met a whistleblower, which more is going to come out with that probably tomorrow, guys. So stay tuned. So you can email me at gatheringbride@gmail.com. If you want this document, I will email it over. Hopefully I'm not completely swamped, but I'll have my assistant help me with this. Okay, so constitutionality. So continue. You explained.
Let's go to the next page portion.
Sure.
This portion we've been through. But I will probably end up publishing this on Social Media Freedom Foundation, which, your audience can go there. It's a wealth of information. There's a document in there called Section 230 is anything but settled law. It's probably about 20-minute read. And it explains this in much longer, long-form terms so that you can walk through how the laws were formed, and it gives you everything. But go to socialmediafreedom.org, and I will probably put this document up and host it on there as well.
Okay, great. All right, so continue with this.
So in this circumstance, so let me just catch up in the other words of the state here, government. So there is an exercise of governmental function, and again, there's a delineation between private function and governmental function, right? So the private function is, yes, they have a First Amendment right, they can take something down, but the protection is the governmental function, right? That's the Section 230 portion. What I wanted to give everybody is an idea of like exactly what a questionable precedent is. And because everybody throws Barnes versus Yahoo at me, and I go, okay, well, the Ninth Circuit Court determined, quote, any activity that can be boiled down to deciding whether to exclude material the third party seeks to post online is perforce immune under Section 230. Well, if we take that for what that says, imagine if imagine if they banned you because you're a woman. That statement right there is wrong, because that statement would then include discrimination against a protected class. It's allowing unlawful behavior because the courts don't understand that, no, unlawful behavior is unlawful behavior. It's, the legislative intent was never to allow a lawless land, and that's the way the courts are doing it. There's no, definition as to what you can and can't take down, right? So, as I said, that all agencies cannot logically or legally be immune from suit, and in administrative law, such as lower, it's lower on the screen, it slid up, such as Section 230, because you can't restrict liberty and property just for any reason you want. It's not the way it works. Fundamentally, it doesn't work that way. So, and then this is what we're going to get into now when you read this. And let me just tell you, this was the revelation moment. This is the case that we're going to talk about, that it makes the point. It's absolutely dead on. And let me just say, for the lawyers out there, this case is still standing strong. It held as recently in 2013 for the Skinner Railroad Association versus the DOT. It was reversed on another reason, but not because of this case. This case holds. Wait till you see this. So let's go into that, Anna.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to read the case law. In the Carter versus Carter coal mining case, Justice Sutherland delivered the opinion, quote, the power conferred upon the provider is...
Actually, let me inject one thing so people understand why it doesn't say provider. Excuse me. When you have the brackets like that, what I'm doing is I'm substituting Carter, the coal mining company, so that you understand that a service provider, if you substitute out the correct pieces, what they mean normally, then this thing makes sense in the context of what we're doing social media. That's why it's written like this. So just so people understand, it does not say the provider. It doesn't have to do with social media. It has to do with a coal mining company and what they produced. And they produced coal. This produces, data and advertising and so on and so forth. So.
Okay, but that's really great to know, because that makes it easier for us to understand that's not actually in the law or in the opinion in this case. It is just so we understand what they're talking about. Yeah, right. Because we're not lawyers, so we need to understand what this is saying. Great, thank you. Okay, the power conferred upon the provider is, in effect, the power to regulate the affairs of an unwilling user. This is legislative delegation in its most obnoxious form. Section 230 does not confer power to an official or an official body, presumptively disinterested, but to private persons whose interests may be and often are adverse to the interest of others in the same business, right? We saw
my
this in
case.
Your case.
Right. There's my case. That is exactly what they did to me. They regulated adversely to my business to help their own.
The difference between operating an interactive computer and advertising service and restricting its production is, of course, fundamental. The former is a private activity. The latter is necessarily a governmental function, since, in the very nature of things, one person may not be entrusted with the power to regulate the business of another, and especially of a competitor. And a statute which attempts to confer such power undertakes an intolerable and unconstitutional interference with personal liberty and private property. The delegation is so clearly arbitrary and so clearly a denial of rights safeguarded by the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. Interesting. That is unnecessary to do more than refer to decisions of this court which foreclose the question. Chester Poultry Corp versus United States, close quote. Wow, what an opinion. Wow.
Yeah, that highlight right there is it. It's everything. It was a 1936 case, and it basically says very clearly that one person, meaning Google, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else it is, cannot be entrusted with the power to regulate the business of another, and especially a competitor. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that you're not a business or a competitor. You are. If you post something online, you take up space for somebody to see. Their advertising takes up space as well. So therefore, they are a direct competitor for you for newsfeed. Everyone is. It is the only kind of business where they themselves are essentially selling off what the space that you have. So they are, they have a vested interest. They have their own prerogative to get you out of there, to shove in their own stuff, right? It's so obvious. And the point of this is that any statute, which is like Section 230, that confers the power to these companies to be able to regulate my liberty and my property, it's so clearly arbitrary, meaning they can do whatever they want. Well, that's what they do. They do anything they want. And it's clearly a denial of rights safeguarded by the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. That is still strong precedent. It was still there in 2013. And that is what we're saying here is that these companies cannot delegate this power to a private entity, because inevitably it's always going to be arbitrary. It's always going to be capricious. But not only that, and we're going to get into the language soon, it's in the actual language of the law, the arbitrary, the discretionary aspect of it. That's going to be exciting too. So we can move on.
Perfect. Let's move on to the conclusion. The conclusion that puts this together. By the way, the Social Media Freedom Foundation, that is Jason's nonprofit organization. So the conclusion is the Social Media Freedom Foundation nonprofit organization was founded for the sole purpose of protecting freedom of expression online. Amen. The California courts have consistently failed to apply and or resolve the textual interpretation issues surrounding Section 230. We are moving away from a textual approach and towards a novel constitutional approach. The courts denied me due process. Jason talked about himself. They denied him due process in his case against Facebook, Fyk versus Facebook. My case was dismissed under Section 230C1. And by the way, I'm not streaming on Facebook. I wish I was, because I'm banned on Facebook. I can't go live on Facebook. So I probably would have been banned permanently if I had this here, but I wouldn't care. I would have went live on Facebook too. I really don't give a rip.
That's what a patriot is, by the way, folks. All of our audience should be paying attention to that. You know what? You know that there may be consequences, but you do it anyhow. That's the point. And I would, tell everybody, do it anyhow. Say what you believe. Say what you think. Don't let them intimidate you. If they're going to throw you off, they're going to throw you off. And I'm already warning right now, all congressional members that they don't like that are going to run for office, they're all going to get thrown out in 2022. We know that's happened. It's going to happen. Right. Know that the prediction is made now, but you do it anyhow.
Right. Well, the thing is, like, I don't care about Facebook. I mean, Twitter either, even though I have almost 500,000. But YouTube is where I do ministry. So I'm hoping not to be banned here. I'm praying in Jesus' name. But you know what? You brought up a good point when we were talking last night. You said, Anna, these are competitors to Facebook. Even though the CEOs are all really good friends, they are all in competition against one another. Even though Section 230 kind of talks about all of them in the same bubble. So
actually, and before we go too far, I do want to go back. Well, you don't have to pull it back up again, but another point, you know how I was saying about competitors in the same business and the regulations, basically one can't regulate the other. Look what happened to Parler. Parler got regulated out by Apple and Google and all the stores when they are a competitor in the space. They just went like magic, poof, gone. And that's the point, is they can't have that power to do that. That power must reside with people that are elected.
Good point. Okay, so I don't even remember. Did we read this, huh? Yeah, we did. So why don't you explain? Did we? Oh my
We
gosh.
didn't know. The court's denied me due process. My case
That's right.
is dismissed under 230C1 is where we
Oh
stopped.
yeah, and then we started talking about Facebook. That's right. Thank you. Sorry, I'm doing like, okay. If people messaging me actually watching this saying this is fascinating. Amen. This is very fascinating.
It's something
Okay.
you haven't heard.
Yeah.
People aren't talking about this. This is what I'm trying to give everybody the information, and that's all we're trying to do here. And I think that that's what you're doing as well, Anna, right? We're just trying to get the information out to people.
We just want the truth. We want to be able to understand this because most of us, like I said, are not lawyers. So we need someone to break this down for us and give us some hope that something's going to happen, because every case gets thrown out and it's really frustrating. Okay, so the court's denied you due process. Your case was dismissed under Section 230C1. And you said, I now have the standing to sue the government itself. In other words, I had to lose my case in order to gain the standing to pursue the United States government over Section 230's constitutionality, because the statute, Section 230, provided immunity to private persons, Facebook, when they arbitrarily restricted my liberty and property under protection of the law. There are fundamental principles in administrative law that an agency must conform to, but in this case, Section 230, they do not. The courts must lay down an easily understood, quote, intelligible principle upon which all its regulations, community standards, must be based. Section 230 maintains the Good Samaritan intelligible principle, hence the quotes. The agency's regulations and enforcement, by the way, the agencies, right? These are Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, right? The agency's regulations and enforcement must be, quote, in the public interest, have measurable bounds, and be uniformly enforced. Antitrust or anti-competitive restrictions are diametrically opposed to being a good Samaritan, right? This antitrust, anti-competitive restrictions are opposed to diametrically opposed to being a good Samaritan acting in the public interest. So why don't you explain that really quickly? What does that sentence mean? Antitrust or anti-competitive restrictions oppose good Samaritans, these agencies, to being good Samaritans in the public interest.
Well, a good Samaritan by definition is that it's to render aid to someone else. And good Samaritan protections would be, for any action or omission, rendered in good faith to help others. If you restrict, if you wipe my page out because I'm not a financial gain for you, that because you want to make more money, you're not a good Samaritan. You're not acting in the public interest. You're acting in your own self-interest. And that right there is the principle of Section 230 that most courts have overlooked for years and not recognized. That right there, the fundamental question we have to ask is, was whatever they did, no matter what it was, did they act as a good Samaritan? Antitrust and anti-competitive restrictions are just fundamentally not. They're just not. I mean, if you're trying to hurt my business, that you're not acting in the public interest.
Well said. That's exactly right. Okay, continuing here. In addition to enforcing guidelines, all regulatory agents must be U.S. citizens and have no financial interest. Interesting, because Facebook and these organizations aren't U.S. citizens; they're private entities. They have and they're not supposed to have financial interest in the businesses or entities they are regulating.
This is important in the political world. I'll let you read the rest, but this is very important in the scope of political control.
47 U.S. Code 154 Federal Communications Commission qualifications. Each member of the commission shall be a citizen of the United States. No member of the commission or person employed by the commission shall be financially interested in any company it regulates. End quote. If an agency takes any action, the restricted entity is entitled to his day in court, which is called due process. Section 230 specifically precludes any agency action from being subjected to a scope of review. So break this down before we continue.
So this is very important, because I know the people that will try to pull this apart in some way, shape, or form and say, well, they're not the FCC. I recognize they're not the FCC, but they're granted the same type of powers as an agency, and the closest analogous is the FCC, right? Because the FCC can regulate television and radio waves, but they can't do the internet, right? It was pulled. So you have to look at what are their qualifications, what happens with an agency, right? And the two basic principles are, well, because you're restricting liberty and property of another, that they have to be U.S. citizens to begin with. I mean, think about that. And I mean, it's probably almost true, but Facebook has at least admitted publicly that it uses foreign countries to regulate content. Well, if China is regulating content of U.S. citizens in a U.S. election, do you think that it's going to regulate to the benefit of the U.S.? That's a danger to the society in general. It's honestly a homeland security issue that these companies should not have any foreigners regulating anything at the core. It should be a basic qualification. If you are going to regulate a U.S. citizen, you have to be a U.S. citizen. I mean, I'm not even saying that's constitutional itself, but that's just common sense. And then the second one is also common sense. Guess what? The FCC can't regulate anybody that they have a financial interest in. They call that lobbying in Congress, right? If you have a financial interest and they benefit from which is what anti-competitive behavior does, they will regulate to their own self-benefit. Guess what? They can't have a financial interest. That should be a fundamental principle of of Section 230 is that these private entities can't, regulate anything they have an interest in. Well, guess what? They're advertisers. We're advertisers. They make more money if we go away. I mean, it's just these things don't exist, and that's why they need to exist. So that's a really important thing here. And again, to all of the politics, everybody that is looking at the political world, you have foreign entities, foreign people that are tasked with the job of blocking. And I'm not making this up. Blocking and screening your materials under protection from our government. They can't do that.
It's absurd.
They can currently, but you get my point.
It's absurd. Totally absurd. There's actually some things I found working with Project Veritas a few years ago regarding Twitter. And I'm streaming on Twitter right now. Let me just say that I'm just going to say it, whatever. That they found we had a whistleblower that gave us some info where they had communication between China and people on Twitter saying they were being hacked by China. Twitter was being hacked by China. And China was saying, if you don't take these people off of Twitter, we're going to continue doing this. And meaning it was like private citizens in China and other citizens as well. And Twitter took them off. So
that's and to me, that right there that's treason. If you're taking down a political party and you're acting on behalf of a foreign agent, you are acting in a treasonous manner.
That's right.
This is not a joke.
It's not.
And that's the problem is that, and it's funny because, as I said, I've talked to some congressmen and they said, oh, well, we're going to legislate more. And you even said that, oh, they're going to fix the legislation. No, you guys screwed it up in the first place. It's the citizens that are now trying to dismantle this thing because Congress made the mistake of ever doing it in the first place. And instead of making it worse, why aren't they supporting just getting rid of the part that you're not allowed to do? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not the whole law. And we'll actually even go into the side effects because that's a question that I get a lot. What happens if Section 230 is repealed? Is the internet going to collapse? No, it's not. Neither did net neutrality. Remember that? Remember the whole internet was going to collapse under net neutrality? No, it didn't exist before. Then it existed, and then it didn't exist again. And you know what? We still have an internet. Still there. So don't panic, anybody. We'll get into that too. But let's finish up with this, and we'll jump into.
We're almost done. There's like another page left, half a page left, I should say. So continue reading. Yeah, so you went through this. Is Good Samaritan acting in a public interest?
Yeah, next paragraph down.
Next paragraph. The constitutional challenge. This is 2 more paragraphs, guys. This is, thank you, by the way, again, for breaking this down. This is amazing. This is so interesting and it's needed. Okay, the constitutional challenge will be filed in the Southern District of Florida. So this is your case, correct?
This will be the constitutional case. My case against Facebook is in California, but this one doesn't have to be in California. And actually, you don't need to really necessarily read this because I can just synopsize this paragraph. So because of venue, when you use terms of service, you agree to sue in the state of their, their liking, which is California, because they have home field advantage. I believe, I don't know what the outcome of it was, but I believe that President Trump's First Amendment case, the class action, actually was they motioned to pull the venue from Florida to California, and if they can do that, they're going to again have the home field advantage, and I hope that he wins it. I really do, but at the same time, he's got one end of the spectrum here where he's proving state action. I'm on the other end of the spectrum saying, no, they're a private entity, and we squeeze them in between. One way or the other, it's unconstitutional, either under the First or under the Fifth, depending on whether they are a state authorized, agent or a state actor, one or the other, right? But in the case of this constitutional case, I'm not suing big tech. They're not involved anymore. Now what's happened is the United States government has hurt me. They basically said, well, we protected anti-competitive behavior. Well, now I'm going to sue them. And what it does is it presents an opportunity here. And this is what the end of that document was about. I know Governor DeSantis is making a run at trying to get this fixed. And the governor's office, when we bring the case in South Florida, they will notify the attorney general and the governor of the state. It's one of the first things we have to do in the case. And Governor DeSantis and the attorney general have an option. They can be in opposition to us. They can fight us. I think that would be a unwise decision considering what that would look like. You're trying to keep Section 230 in place. Instead, they can opt not to fight us, which means that we're going to be in front of, a tribunal, 3 judges, and they're going to look at this and they're going to look at its constitutionality, and we're going to dismantle it and we're going to figure out what's going on, because there's only 2 real ways this can go. It can either we pull apart portions of it and we repeal it, and it would most likely be Section 230C2A that'll come down, and you'll see why in a few minutes. But on the on the other side is that we will get sort of what's called a declaratory judgment, meaning they'll explain it finally. Like a court will actually go, okay, here's what the language really means, and this is why it's constitutionally sufficient. But Governor DeSantis and Ashley Moody, the attorney general, they have an opportunity here where Florida could come in as my ally. They could actually come in as my co-plaintiff, and Florida could help save this nation. I would welcome President Trump. There are opportunities for him to help us here because we all have the same goal. And I'm not looking for the fame, the power, all I care about is I want my freedom back. I want my freedom to be able to say what I want online and have my freedom of expression without some company just going, boop, you're gone. That bugs me. And not only that, but okay, so say they do that, why is my government protecting that? That's ridiculous. So again, there is a major opportunity here where the state of Florida could come to our aid and go after this. Because I think that the Supreme Court would be hard pressed to not hear a constitutional case that the state of Florida was joining. We might be able to fix this thing.
Amazing. And as a newly resident of Florida, a Floridian, I am all for it. Florida is saving the nation. It used to be Texas, now it's Florida. Hallelujah!
Isn't it great down here?
It's amazing. That's right. You're in South Florida. I love it. I just moved here a few months ago, and I absolutely adore it. I'm so glad to be out of communist New York. So I love that Florida is kind of leading the charge now, and so this is exciting. And it would be great, like you were saying, for Governor Ron DeSantis to join this lawsuit and also have the AG join this lawsuit, because if they join this lawsuit, everyone, this is the kicker. If they join this lawsuit that Jason is bringing forth, where he's suing the federal government, it then turns into Florida versus the federal government. It turns into a state suing the federal government, which, as you may know, the Supreme Court has to take this case. It can no longer dismiss it. It has to take a case where it's a state versus the federal government. It is a must. So this is how we go around the Ninth Circuit. This is how we go around the statute and the policies where big tech, Silicon Valley says, well, you can only, if you want to sue Facebook and big tech, you have to sue them through California. And unfortunately, as you know, it just keeps getting thrown out. It's not being heard. And it's being heard, it's just being thrown out and dismissed. But this is how we get it to the Supreme Court. So this is what sparked my interest, Jason, when you told me about it. I'm like, wow, this is actually possible. But this obviously has to appease, I should say, Ron DeSantis and the Attorney General. I don't see why they would not jump on this case. It would make sense. It would make no sense for them not to, because they themselves have gone against big tech, and to no avail. This seems like the only case, in my opinion, that has legs.
We have a general opportunity here, and I can't be sure. Nobody's ever sure what's going to happen. I don't know what the courts necessarily will do, and I'm not claiming that like, oh, this is a big win, but I can tell you that it makes logical sense. It should make logical sense to non-lawyers. I can't claim to know all of the procedural rules because I am not a bar licensed attorney. And people ask me like, you're not an attorney? No, I just read. And then when I was done reading, I read more. And then when I was done that, I read even more than that. I just kept reading. I kept going backwards, and I kept trying to figure out what and how this all works. And we have an opportunity here really to circumvent legislative help. We can really just go in there and say, hey, there's a big problem. There's the citizen. I mean, this realistically, and I believe that you may concur on this. This may be one of the most historical cases in modern history. I mean, this could be for all the marbles. I mean, that's really what is going to be put in front of these judges. And I'm hoping that we get strong, honest, patriotic judges that care about the Constitution and care about our rights, because it's all in their hands. If we do not stop the control of information under protection of law, that's completely unfettered, there's no restriction to it whatsoever. Do you think Congress is going to make it much better? I mean, I know that there are good congressmen and women out there that should come help us, come join us, and I know the ones that aren't. It will make a very clear delineating line which ones want to keep Section 230 in place, and the ones that are not worried about putting their name on a bill and are more interested in actually resolving the problem for everybody. Because at the end of the day, think about the irony of this, Anna. Congress granted private entities the ability to regulate Congress. Oops. That's what they've done. They could shut them off. And then it would be a legislative fight to get it all undone. But realistically, that's what they took down a sitting president. Now, I know most of your audience probably likes President Trump. I love the guy. I love him, right? But the thing is that it doesn't matter if you hate him. That's terrifying that private entities can shut up the most powerful man in the free world. That's crazy. That has to be stopped.
Yeah, but
because that's why they're elected.
Right. They allow terrorists to be on social media and sex traffickers, but they take off the president of the United States. It's so unlawful. It's so insane. And it should be illegal to do that.
Let me inject this too. And see, and here's where you go into what I just said. All of that stuff we just read. And we look at the logic of it, because you can tie everything to it, every single argument, every which way. Is it logical that removing a president is in the interest of the public acting as a good Samaritan, when inherently the president was elected by the interest of the public?
Right.
It doesn't make any logical sense. It can't be in the interest of the public to remove who was publicly announced. That goes for Congress too.
That's a good
It
point.
goes for any elected official. If the public interest is out there,
Mm.
why are they removing them when that's what it's supposed to protect? Is some function in the interest of the public.
Especially because America voted President Trump in. He's elected, like you're saying. Congress is elected. Big tech was never elected. They have no right to determine who comes on and off their platforms. Even though it is a private entity, it's protected by something that Congress passed, which is Section 230. It's completely unconstitutional. And it's absurd that Congress would protect big tech that's only getting bigger and more brazen. We saw that with Parler and getting rid of it from its apps and having them shut down. And because let me tell you, Parler is back up, but I barely use it. I used it for a little while.
They stopped its growth. They killed its
stopped
growth. That's what they did. They accomplished what they set out to do, and they hurt it financially. They hurt it every which way because they were able to regulate. But let me extend what I just said about President Trump, and let me put this in the framework of you. Your audience is the public interest, is it not? It grew out of the public interest. Is it in the public's interest to disconnect you from the public? Acting as a good Samaritan because they don't want to hear what you have to say? So that, to every other influencer that has lost a large audience, isn't that based on the interest of the public? See how fundamentally it doesn't make any logical sense, because in the interest of the public is to protect the public from things that are actually harmful, not from opinions that they dislike. It doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah, and I don't think spreading the gospel and spreading truth is harmful.
No.
Unless the entities themselves feel like they're being harmed. And okay, let's continue this, and then we can wrap up because we're already going an hour and a half. And for me, I know when I watch videos on YouTube, I'm like, I can't take any more information. My brain is shutting down, and that's just typical because there's a lot of info here.
I think this will end up being a segmented piece all over the internet, because this is all of the real information. This is how it really gets broken down. And go look at the law. I mean, that's what we're saying, the things that the law actually says. Plus, I also want to talk a bit more about the Social Media Freedom Foundation and how we need to pursue this. I would say bring up slide 1, and we'll actually get into the actual language of the law at this point, because these are the mistakes that the courts, because we've talked about them several times, the mistakes that the courts have made, and where they essentially just aren't reading the textual basis of what it says, and that's where all of the questionable precedent arises from, is from these things in the law. And a lot of people, I mean, it's funny how many people think that Section 230 is, and before they even see this, a lot of people think that Section 230 is the 26 words that invented the internet. Now, if you can pull up slide number 1.
Sure.
There's a lot more than 26 words there, are there not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is the actual protection. And I'm going to walk through this in a way that nobody else has ever done this. And we're going to look at the actual words that it says, because most people don't look at it. They're not going to go after this show and say, oh, okay, well, let me pull up the law. And instead, we're going to put the law right in front of you and say, here it is. This is what we're working on. 47 U.S. Code, Section 230, protection for private blocking and screening of offensive material, right? Well, first thing that we can establish from this is protection. Let's look at that word in itself. Actually, before we even do that, private blocking, right? So this is, we don't have to argue, this is granted to a private entity because it's right in the language of the law. It was private blocking and screening of offensive material. So if we look at what it says, it is a protection. First word, 230C, right? And this is done like an outline. Let me ask you, Anna, is protection plural or is it singular? Because every word of the law is important, that we must give meaning to every single word. You ever hear the letter of the law? It's missing a letter. Is it protection or protections? And it's funny because I had an attorney once say to me, oh, well, that's semantics. Right then and there, that's bad lawyering. No, it is actually very important what the letters mean. So is that singular or is that plural?
It's a good question. I would say it's plural.
Protection, no S?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's singular. There's no S on the end of it. It is a singular protection. So it's implying that there's only really one protection here. And this people don't recognize. They don't know that. So protection, what are they doing? Good Samaritan. Well, there's those pesky quotes which make it an intelligible principle. So it's a protection for acting in the interest of the public for the benefit of others. And what can they do? What is the thing that they're allowed to do? Blocking and screening of offensive material. Now, the material is the building blocks of your content, your property, and what you choose to do is your liberty. So they can block and screen it, meaning they can regulate it, they can restrict it. Okay. So that's what the protection is. So everybody thinks that 230C1 is a protection. Well, it's really not. It actually is an instruction. It says that we can't treat a publisher as someone else. And what does it say specifically? It says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Okay, seems pretty simple. Can't be held accountable for what somebody else does. There's the point of Good Samaritan is it's a protection for any action or omission of action, meaning the failure to act. Congress recognized that if it gave you a protection to be able to restrict information, you'd be responsible for anything that was left behind, right? Because you failed to act. That's very different than acting to not act, right? Because if I were to find child pornography online and I did not remove it because I chose to leave it there, well, I've now actually acted. I've done something. I've had some involvement. And instead, 230C1 says, well, if you were not in any way involved with the content and it just happens to be on your site, passively hosted, because somebody else did it, somebody else put it up there. In other words, you're not responsible for anybody else's content or conduct. You're not involved. That's what it means. And you can't be treated as, and let's go back to this word. This is where a key piece, because this is what I lost my case on and I was dismissed on. It says no provider or user of an interactive computer server shall be treated as the publisher, not a publisher, the publisher. Okay. That's important. If we give every single word meaning, okay, let me go back to the Constitution. You know that James Madison once argued in the Federalist Papers that the most important word in the right to free speech is the word the. Do you know why? Because the denoted that it pre-existed. It was just the right. It was already there. And that if it pre-existed any potential abridgment. Meaning you have the right. It's just there. Well, who's the publisher? I'm the publisher. I was not treating Facebook as the publisher because that's me. I was treating them as a publisher. And if the courts are right in converting it to a publisher, and if we go back to the language of the law, if you cannot treat them as a publisher or speaker, so long as the information arose out of somewhere else, like fact checking, then they cannot be treated as a publisher in any way, shape, or form. And if you notice in 230C1, there is no measure of good faith. So meaning there's no motive. It doesn't matter what they do. They are absolutely immune for all publishing. All right. That's wrong. Do you know why we know it's wrong? Like beyond any doubt? Well, if we look at the next one, this is the actual protection. Nope, not the next slide. The next one down, 230C2. That's okay. 230C2, okay, says civil liability. Well, there's the protection. It's civil liability protection. This is when they act. This is when they do something. The first one is when they don't do anything, and the second one is when they do something, okay? And this is what Congress allowed them to do. And it says, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of. So here comes the protection, okay? A, any action. Clear on that one? Any action taken whatsoever, right? So any action voluntarily taken, meaning they chose to do it without any state action, meaning they're not being told to do it in good faith. Well, there's your measure of motive. to restrict access to or availability of material, meaning there's your restriction, there's your ability to restrict the liberty and property of someone else. And the property is the material that the provider or user considers. Remember, we were talking about arbitrary, capricious. The provider can consider anything to be anything. It's completely discretionary. It's completely arbitrary because it's right there in the law that they can arbitrarily hit you for anything that they consider to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. And let me ask you, Anna, what does objectionable mean? What is objectionable? Is there any measurable bounds to it, or is it just arbitrary?
It's objectionable.
Yeah, it's arbitrary, right? It's discretionary. It's whatever they consider.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the language of the law again. Sorry to be bouncing back and forth, but we're
No, it's
trying to
good.
walk this through. Now,
This is great, Jason. This is really, really good. So continue.
okay, so going back, we don't really have to look too much at C2B because that's a situation where they're giving the ability for somebody else to block what they don't want to see. Common sense. Well, I don't understand why these companies don't lean heavily on C2B. Like, if you don't want to see bad things, why don't they make the systems allow you to filter out more information on your own accord instead of telling you what you don't want to see? They don't do that, do they? Or maybe protect, from children being able to get on the site. That's C2B. But if, and this is a very simple thing, if you can take any action voluntarily to restrict materials, isn't that publishing? I mean, I can actually answer that for you. The Ninth Circuit Court said that restricting materials is something that a publisher does. So if you're a publisher in that circumstance, but in the first one, you can't be treated as a publisher without any measure of motive, you may as well be saying in 230C1, you may as well say, look, you can't drive the car. And then the very next law says you can't take a left turn in the car. If you can't drive the car, the left turn becomes irrelevant, does it not? Because you can't drive it in the first place. If you can't be a publisher in any capacity, you can't be treated as it, even if you are the publisher, right? Or a publisher or any publishing or do anything, the second law becomes redundant. It's a duplication. It's useless. We brought that up in our case. In the legal terms, it's called surplusage. It's essentially a useless law. So if Congress has, not Congress, sorry, if the Supreme Court has said that every word is important, that word "the" is important then, and if it denotes that it was a pre-existing publisher, I'm the pre-existing publisher, I'm not treating them as a publisher, and that solves the duplication issue because the first law says if you didn't do anything, you're not responsible. And then the second law, 230C2A, says if you do something, if you take any action voluntarily to restrict, to do something, to do publishing things, you're allowed to do one thing, and that is restrict offensive, objectionable materials. That is, whatever you consider. Now, that's the language portion. That's what everybody's been trying to fix. That's what the courts do not want to untwist. There is a massive conflict right there. And we said to the courts, we actually said, this is how bad it gets. We said to the court that if you cannot be treated as a publisher under 230C1, which makes no sense, then the second law becomes redundant. And you know how the courts resolve that issue? They made it worse. The courts, in fact, then turned around and said, no, 230C2 actually provides a separate grant of immunity, perhaps because they developed information even in part, end quote. Okay. So C2 now protects, because the courts are saying this, that it's if they develop information even in part. Okay. So let's go back to the language again, something that nobody looks at. And you might actually have to, can you slide that up, or the banner at the bottom is blocking half of it?
Sure, I'll take off the banner.
Okay, there we go. So a lot of people never look at 230F3. So F is the definition section. It says what these things are, right? As used in the section. So what is the definition of an information content provider? And where do we find that? That was actually back up in 230C1, where it says no provider, user of an interactive computer service, so that's a service provider, shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So it's got to be another information content provider. So let's see what an information content provider is by legal definition. This is not that whole publisher platform. Forget that argument. Throw it out the door. These are the actual words. These are the actual distinctions. One is an interactive computer service provider, and the other is an information content provider. That's the delineation. So what does it say? An information content provider, the term information content provider means any person or entity that is responsible in whole or in part for the creation or development of information provided through the internet or any other interactive computer service. Whoa, okay, so let's unpack this. Any person or entity, meaning anybody, Facebook, Google, Twitter, any company, anybody, right? If they are responsible in whole, and let me, and I know that, Anna, I got to ask you a question here. In whole or in part? You're muted, by the way.
Yes.
In part. If it's in whole, it's the whole thing. In part, would you say that that means significant amount, or would you think insignificant?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, again, it's kind of very arbitrary, right?
Well, a whole would be the whole.
Yeah.
In part, is this significant amount, or is this, or is it insignificant? In part would be as little insignificance as possible, right? Even if they mess with it, if they modify, if they change, if they identify content, send it out to a fact checker to get it laundered and then send it back, are they or are they not in part involved in that?
Right.
Insignificantly. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we know if it's an entity that is responsible insignificantly, because all the words matter, because it says or, it could be either or, it doesn't have to be both. For the creation, which we all know if they create content, yes, they're on the hook for it. But if they develop information, they develop information, that's the modification, the manipulation, the changing. That's what they do with fact checking, with pushing misinformation, because they are developing ideas and content of other people against yours. Facebook, Google, Twitter, they are by legal definition information content providers, which gets no immunity whatsoever. But let's finish this up. So it then says of information provided through the internet. So if they do anything with manipulate the information whatsoever, they fail on 230C1 automatically because they're provided by another information provider. Can you locate anywhere in 230C2A that it says that an information content provider is in fact in the language? It doesn't exist there. So when the Ninth Circuit Court turned around and said that perhaps because they developed information even in part is the way that it fixes the redundancy, it's not even there. It doesn't exist. It's not in the language. And the crazy part is, and then they also said that I didn't identify how Facebook materially contributed to the content. Well, materially contributed to means significantly, and the language is diametrically opposed to that. It literally says if they mess with the content at all, in part, if they modify it, they are developing the information. These companies shouldn't have any of these 230 protections, even within the language of the law, if the courts did the right thing. I just ripped it apart. That's the problem, is that they basically have sovereign immunity for anything that they choose to do as a publisher without any measure of motive, and they are getting away with everything because the California courts fail to do their job. Fix it. The Supreme Court failed to do its job. It should have heard my case. It could still. If the Supreme Court picked up our case and looked at it tomorrow, we would be able to fix the language of the law. We wouldn't even have to worry necessarily about the constitutionality, because it would limit down. This broad interpretation that they have would actually be very limited compared to what it, I mean, because it's not what it says. I mean, it's right there. I just showed you the language. Anybody that argue with me, okay, explain how the language is any different than that. It's right there. So we are going around this finally. This is the next step. And that's what the Social Media Freedom Foundation was formed for.
And actually, let me pull up the website that you created right now. We're going to wrap up, guys. I know we're pushing 2 hours. Thanks for being here. For those that have been here the whole time, I mean, this is important to be able to understand the law and what the fight is, instead of just throwing out terms and not knowing what it means, and understanding the statutes and the clauses that we are actually fighting against and how to correctly combat them. So tell me about your website you created here. This is socialmediafreedom.org.
Yes. We set up this nonprofit, and the reality here is that I am alone. I've been alone in this battle. Obviously, I have lawyers, but I've taken this upon myself. I did not raise any money to this point because it was my own case. But now that this case is actually exceeding me, we're going into this has an opportunity to fix all of social media for everyone in this nation, and it has a real shot. And while everyone's out there raising money and so forth, we actually have something that affects you. Everybody that's watching this right now, this will affect you. If I succeed, I will release their grip. And what will end up happening, and this is the result, is 230C2A is most likely going to be what is repealed. That section right there is the part that is unconstitutional. 230C1 will still remain in place. They will not be responsible for what somebody else did. Makes logical sense. And then what happens is an official regulatory body would have to be set up like the FCC to set regulations for all of them. That's what will happen. And that will be then subject to the same standards as all of these other regulatory agents. Well, the Social Media Freedom Foundation was set up specifically as the plaintiff for everybody. It's an advocate for everybody's freedom online, and it will sue on my behalf. The Social Media Freedom Foundation will be the front runner in this whole thing. And we need your help. I mean, I need real resources. I explain it in, because I'm a proponent of, the military and vets. We have the strategic advantage. We could get the enemy. We have the strategic advantage. I don't have the supply line or the sustained fight. I need that right now. We have counsel. We have lots. As a matter of fact, actually, Thomas Rentz just recently told me that he would like to enter the case pro bono and bring other attorneys pro bono into this case too, because he believes it also has legs. That absolutely we have an opportunity to take this down, and we need more support. And I believe that we actually have some and I don't want to make the announcement yet until our board is about to change. Some very big players may be joining this. We need that support because, matter of fact, David Harris Jr. is calling me right now. We are all on the same boat right here. We're all going to get wiped out if we don't resolve this. And this is the people for the people. I am the average guy. I never thought I'd be doing this. And if I don't get financial support, I don't know if I can get through it all.
Yeah.
And they don't want that to happen.
This is definitely crucial. We need the funding to be able to take this to court. I mean, this costs a lot of money, a lot of money, obviously. And here's what's amazing. If Governor Ron DeSantis jumps on board and the AG of Florida jumps on board, we got a great case. We have
got a good shot.
Yeah, we have a good shot, right? We have the state versus the federal government. It has to go to the Supreme Court. Okay, so we need to get this rolling and going. And Jason's putting it together, and he's getting some great attorneys on his side. You have Thomas, who says, I'm going to do this pro bono. That means that this case has legs. And here's what's amazing. If he does end up winning, if Jason ends up winning this lawsuit, if Florida jumps on board and we win this lawsuit, it goes to Supreme Court and it wins, it can potentially, right? It would repeal the Section 230 unconstitutional section, or maybe the whole thing itself. And that would open the door to even have lawsuits for damages. And imagine the damages. It's possible. We're not saying it's going to happen. It's possible.
Yeah, we've discussed it amongst the attorneys and so forth, but we believe that there's some procedural things there that the government has hurt so many people that they may be responsible for this because Congress, I mean, plainly, Congress messed up. They made a massive mistake back in 1996. And I mean, we know that it was with good intention, but if we can get this fixed, it would restore, freedom of expression on online, and it will affect everyone. It will affect people worldwide. So obviously, if I disappear, it's not a joke anymore. I mean, people don't want this to happen because they like the control, they like the censorship, and that's why I put it out to the world, because now I'm not alone. Now Anna. Now everyone knows. Here is how it works. Somebody can do this one way or the other, whether I'm here or not. But I am going to fight this out. I'm fighting. I mean, I haven't given up years. I've been put through, I told you earlier, ridicule. You wouldn't believe the amount of ridicule. You're an idiot. This is a First Amendment protect. No, that's how they react. And in fact, actually, I want to clear up something, because Facebook lied in my case outright. They said that I had pages dedicated to urinating in public. That's disgusting. You know why? Because I accidentally transferred the wrong page URL, and the page was called facebook.com take a piss funny. It wasn't my page. It was an accident. It was literally a clerical error. I didn't even own it. And on top of that, take a piss funny is actually a UK and Australian term for being funny. They just turned that into something completely different. And the judge even repeated it in his order, which in itself shows you that there's a bias. Meanwhile, everybody says, well, where's your case now? Well, we have basically come back to the court and said anti-competitive behavior is acceptable or it's not, because the two cases are opposed. Are you going to vacate your original judgment? And the judge is just sitting on the order. Like, he's just not ruling. And it's like, it's a very obvious answer. Enigma said, Good Samaritan, anti-competitive behavior is not covered. I should be going to trial, but they won't do it. They won't let me because it's Facebook. That's where we are at in this world. But I need everybody's help. Legitimately, this is how we can get this done. I need people. I need man on the ground. I need financial support. I'm fighting for all of you. I put it all on the line. I put my own world on the line for everybody. And I honestly, Anna, I got to thank you. You spent the time to figure this out. That you didn't sit down and you didn't try to do a 5-minute interview, because everybody asked me, can you explain this in 5 minutes? It's 25 years of mess. How do you explain that in 5 minutes? You took the time. And even if people don't sit through the full 2 hours that we just spent on this, you know what? They can go back and they can piece it apart and they can reference it. This was probably the best explanation I've ever done, because you sat down and figured it out with me. And I got to thank you, Anna. You definitely you did your job.
Well, I'm just like everyone else. I want to know the truth. I want to understand the law. I want to understand how we can fight back. I want to know what we can do that is going to give us a victory. I'm all about I'm all about the victory. And, we already have the victory in Christ. Amen. But this battle we're to take on. And so we can't keep putting our head in the sand or keep saying, yeah, we're winning and we got this. No, we got to actually go out and do it. Right? No, Jesus said,
everybody has to. Everybody has to fight.
We all have our part. And you know what? Praise the Lord. He gave me a platform. So I'm going to use it to spread truth. That's why I keep getting banned. I keep getting restricted. I'm surprised I'm even on YouTube still. But it's mostly because I do ministry. I try not to do any political stuff on YouTube anymore, even though here I am talking about Section 230. But you know what? God's protecting his channel because it's not mine. It's his. It's all about the truth. And so I want to thank you for what you're doing. And here's what's cool. You have all these different tabs up here. You have your filings, your FIC versus Facebook. You have a lot of information here. People can really
even under filings, you see CDA explained. Yeah. That's literally a fundamental outline for the people that don't get it. It's broken down into what each thing's okay, here we go. Section 230 fundamental principles. It gives you what good faith is. It gives you the background, any act or omission. It gives you all of the pieces of why the law works like it works, with definitions and explanations. It's a very, very simple outline for those that really don't get it.
Well done. Well done. Well, again, guys, I want to say, I have talked to Jason the past weekend as well, and last night, and just breaking this down here with him. I have to say, this isn't a really, really important case. This might be the most important case that I have seen in revoking the protection given under Section 230. It's unconstitutional from both ends, First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. And Jason's taking this fight via the Fifth Amendment. He was denied due process by the court. So let's try to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. Jason, we are praying for you. We thank you for fighting. Jason's website is socialmediafreedom.org. Guys, we have to support true cases like this. Lawyers are expensive. There's one doing pro bono, but it costs money to make these filings. It costs a lot of money. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is as well. And I will also donate to you, Jason. I'm going to make a donation today. And I encourage others to follow suit. So please share this broadcast as well, guys. Share this broadcast. Let people know, anyone that wants to know, what is Section 230 exactly? How do we fight back? I think this is a great way. I think you did a great job breaking it down. I have more confidence in being able to explain it now. So I want to thank you for doing that.
That's the big thing. We need to get this information out to others so that people understand that it is not as simple as they say it is. It is much more complex than that.
That's right. But thank you for doing this, Jason. Best of luck. We will be praying for you. I can't wait to come on this channel and give us an update on the proceedings in court, how far and how quick we are, it's going to go through. Hopefully, sometimes it takes years, obviously, to get this through. Right. So hopefully it goes through quickly when we have the governor and attorney general. So listen, you're a friend to the channel. I want you to come back and give us an update soon. But before then, we are going to raise money so this can be filed.
Thank you.
Amen. Well, love you guys. Take care. Guys. Thanks, Jason.